Our next panel discussion aims to provide fresh insight on how integrating technology and diversity among small and medium enterprises is the key to survive, thrive, and trade in the economies of tomorrow. Leading this diverse panel of business leaders and innovation experts is Winston Nesfield, partner at PwC Strategy, Singapore. He will be joined by a panel consisting of Amy Radin, Director of Daily Innovator LLC, Bradley Busetto, Director of the United Nations Development Program Global Center for Tech, Innovation and Sustainability, and the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Alliance for Women, Inez Murray, and Nicole Wakefield, Partner, Global Financial Services Advisory Leader at PwC. Now, if you'd like to ask some questions to the panel, click the yellow button beneath the session window. Now let's go over to Winston and his expert panel to discuss the technology and diversity for business.
Thank you, Glenn, and hello and welcome. Our topic today, as stated, is redefining SMEs through the integration of technology and diversity. I am actually blessed to have a panel dominated by outstanding women leaders. And what we thought we would do is approach this topic from the dimension of financial and technological empowerment of the female economy. So let me set the scene. We all know that 50% of the labor force in most countries are female, but yet females account for a smaller portion of the formal GDP. And this is linked to unpaid work and disproportionately lower income. In advanced economies, the cost to the economy is estimated upwards of 10% of rectifying this. And in emerging economies, even greater, up to 30%. One of the panelists who you'll meet, my fellow panelist Amy, and I were talking pre-panel, and she shared with me the stark differences in how female business founders, in terms of numbers, and even beyond the numbers, how female are treated in investment pitches and the like. So to me, diversity necessarily means the inclusion and participation of women in the economy, whether as consumers and drivers of women-led SMEs, and that's going to be our focus. Our SFF official, Glenn, did share with you who's on my panel, but I'd like to help you get to know them very briefly, and then we'll jump into it. Amy is a fellow New Yorker to me and a change maker, speaker, and author. After a career through several executive positions, she led a digital transformation of the credit card business at Citibank's first global innovation officer. Amy is now a digital and marketing transformation advisor, thought leader, and author of The Change Maker's Playbook. Welcome, Amy. Next up, we have Inez. Inez has dedicated much of her career to women economic empowerment. Inez Murray is the CEO of the Financial Alliance for Women, which is a global peer learning network, financial and non-financial institutions. A seasoned speaker herself and panelist on similar topics, and this topic being very close to her heart, we welcome you too, Inez.
Thank you.
Nicole Wakefield, Nicky, is my fellow partner at PwC and a good friend and a brilliant strategist. She has had several consulting and industry leads, and she is the leader today, in fact, of the PwC's Global Financial Services Advisory, and someone who's very passionate about this topic today of female empowerment. One of her current client projects, New World, New Skills, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is about enabling and maximizing the potential of digital talent exchanges such that women and men can be better matched to roles of leadership. And last but certainly not least, Bradley Busetto leads the UNDP Global Center for Technology and Innovation and Sustainable Development in Singapore. I personally believe that Bradley's experience solving serving in humanitarian missions in Indonesia, Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, and also important work setting up social incubators and impact investment funds prior to his Singapore post will inject diversity and richness into the discussion. So welcome, Bradley and Nicky, and let's get into it.
Thanks, Winston.
Good to see you all.
Now, let me start off with the fact that 23% of MSMEs are led by women, and there's clearly a disparity between male and female participation in the economy, especially within small businesses. It's largely, female participation is largely skewed to smaller firms and are more likely to be in the informal part of the economy, operating in lower value-added sectors. Inez, as CEO for the Financial Alliance, do you have a sense for what some of the main barriers are faced by women that lead to some of the current reality?
Sure, Winston, and thanks. It's a great question, and I think you've raised an important point to start with, which is that there are different segments of women. So you mentioned informal and semi-formal micro and small enterprises. We also have the unbanked, underbanked populations. And then, of course, we have female founders of fintechs and indeed a couple of female founders of unicorns. So they do span the spectrum. But I would say if you're looking at the unbanked, it's about basic lack of access to things like cell phones and the internet, perhaps not having formal means of identifying who they are in terms of birth certificates and so on. So there's been a lot of innovation around biometrics and lowering KYC requirements to get them into the financial system. And then when you look at them as business people, and let's say go up a business size, micro, maybe to the very small to small businesses, you see a lot of semi-formal businesses. So they may not have the kind of financial records that mainstream banks require in order to lend and do the underwriting. They may also not have the traditional collateral that's required. So for instance, in some cultures in East Africa, it's very hard for a woman to actually have property title, and that's often demanded by the incumbent banking sector. You also see perhaps a lack of credit history that a normal financial institution would want to see. And then you have other constraints, time, mobility, things like that, that depends on the culture, of course, and the role that the woman is playing. So you see those kind of structural challenges if you look at it as a segment. And then you see women also self-reporting actually lower levels of financial literacy and so on. So there's a demand side issue as well in terms of them not necessarily looking for the kind of financing from the formal sector that perhaps you would like them to see. So it's both a demand side issue as well as a supply side issue in terms of how technology can come in and really support that underwriting process so that we can get down the cost of lending and really lend to those kind of semi-formal businesses.
Nicky, in the corporate segment, looking slightly further afield from SMEs, you've worked with a variety of global clients inside and outside the formal advisory sector. What are some of the broader societal barriers you've observed hampering the inclusion of women within the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Winston. And it's great to be here. Thank you on this very esteemed panel. I think it's difficult, Winston, to completely separate societal barriers and workplace barriers because I do think that they bleed into each other. So maybe if I just touch on what I think are some of the most significant barriers to the inclusion of women in the economy. So I think to start with, I'd say gender stereotypes. So belief that people carry with them that are attributed incorrectly to a particular gender. And I think some examples that people would relate to could be that men are seen as being better analytical thinkers, but not as good at multitasking, for example, and women are comparatively seen to be poor at STEM subjects, but have higher EQ. I think women are also often penalized by what society views as leadership traits. So women who tend to be more collaborative, asking questions rather than giving orders, might be considered to be too soft for a leadership role. But if they exhibit maybe what's perceived to be more masculine traits, assertiveness and confidence, they can be labeled as being maybe bossy or aggressive. So that's gender stereotypes. I think societal expectations regarding gender roles is another important barrier. So, and as much as I hate to say this as a mother of two beautiful children, I think motherhood actually is a great example and continues to be one of the biggest barriers that women face from a working and perspective. Societal norms, as we know, are that women normally shoulder most of the domestic obligations of having children and raising children, and that often takes them out of the workforce or reduces their presence in the workforce. I think motherhood also triggers assumptions that women are potentially less competent, less committed, and certainly less available to their career. I think another significant social barrier is the affordability and accessibility to childcare. I think this is a huge challenge for women all over the world. It's both a challenge in developed and undeveloped economies. And while the statistics differ by country, there is a general consensus that childcare across the world is both difficult to access, and even when people can access it, can be very, very costly and unaffordable. And because women largely carry these responsibilities, it inhibits their participation either partially or fully. So I think they're some of the big and most complex societal barriers, and then they start to bleed into other workplace barriers like workplace culture. Examples of this could be display overtime, so rewarding people for being in the building for long hours rather than looking at output or outcome. I think this can then lead to a lack of female leaders, which is another barrier. So we know through research that women tend to advance to the top of the middle of management or top middle management, but often struggle getting through the glass ceiling to more senior leadership roles, so senior management roles, for example. And that then leads to a chronic shortage of female mentors and sponsors, which can have a negative impact on women. I've seen many of my clients and organizations that I work with setting up special programs around that. And I think finally that the last comment I would make would be around the insufficiently flexible work practices. As discussed, most women carry the share of domestic and caring responsibilities, and as a result, often need greater flexibility in their schedule to allow them to, pick children up or do the grocery shopping or cook the meals. And certainly before COVID-19, work hours were very set, 9 to 5. Work locations were set. People had to work in the office. So that flexibility was often hampered. So unfortunately, I think it's not simple, and there's many very complex cultural and work barriers.
Thank you for that. Now I'm going to pull us back to SME formation and ask Bradley, what have you observed, especially in the nuances in emerging, capability limited, resource scarce markets and countries in terms of the female economy?
Right. So great question. And again, thanks to be part of this. And I'm learning a lot already from a super distinguished panelist. At UNDP, UNDP is the world's largest development organization. We're focused on helping get the world's poorest people out of poverty, right? And our focus right now is absolutely on SMEs, because SMEs are the lifeblood of the world economy. I mean, not just in the developed world, but especially in the developing world. And not enough SMEs are run by women. And so our double focus is really on women and on SMEs. And this is particularly important in COVID, right? In this pandemic situation, SMEs have been absolutely hammered, and their links to the local supply chains have been cut. Their links to global supply chains, if there were any, have been demolished too. So it's a hugely important topic, really, for the global economy and for just empowering women. But just a couple of statistics. I mean, the previous speakers have really captured the context. But like in Latin America, we've done some work, some research that shows so women-run SMEs are much less likely to default on loans, even though because of stereotypes and biases, they get less money. So they're working with less and default less. So, and then you all know that statistics linked to sort of women funds managers, especially impact fund managers, performing a lot better. Women founders performing a lot better. So different sides of the spectrum. But so tell you just to give some example, and then one of the speakers mentioned issues around IDs. You can't have a digital ID usually unless you have an actual physical ID, and then the phone access is an interesting one, because it's not just about does a woman have a phone. To be part of sort of the digital world, to avail of digital finance, if you're trying to run an SME, you got to really know how to use that phone, right? And so if you don't own it and keep it with you all day, and if your husband, for example, or partner lets you use it for 10 minutes a day, that's not going to cut it, right? You're not going to be able to figure out how to do online banking like that. So it's so from our center in Singapore, people have the idea that, oh, we're kind of just transplanting really cool technology into the developing world and seeing how that works. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to figure out the basic foundations of what's needed to drive change, and then applying smart technology to it. Like in Gambia, we're working not trying to get informal traders to a formal economy, but informal traders who've got their own micro SMEs, and most of them are run by women. We've got this cool program where we're helping get them to digital finance, and it's completely focused on women. So it's about building digital literacy skills first, and then figuring out the digital finance platform later. Another one where we're working with GovLab, which is run by Beth Novak out of New York, it's called the Multi-City Challenge across Africa, where we're working with policymakers, most of the women from kind of second-tier cities across Africa, to kind of crowdsource in the intelligence on policy making from different cities, because they might not have kind of the resources to meet, for example, even in normal circumstances, or to share that kind of information. So it's sort of this notion of collective intelligence and really cool data analytics, but premised on really motivated women policymakers and leaders in Africa who want to learn and shape policy using the coolest new technology. So these are some of the things we're doing, and also I should say, not like this is not meant to be like an MAS promotional video, but we're partnering with the Monetary Authority of Singapore actually, and launching this now to help on a new program, building kind of the digital finance ecosystems for a couple countries, helping support building that a couple of countries of Africa through its APIC, so it's regulatory sandbox approach. But it's not just bringing the technological platforms to Africa, no, but it's rather bringing in, again, digital literacy, focusing on women, and a huge focus right on SMEs. So it's super timely for us, and grateful to be part of this. But
thanks.
Again, look forward to learning from the others.
Thanks, Bradley, for those examples and the plug.
Yes.
Amy, we heard a very focused segment view. We heard some broader societal topics, and we heard some of the challenges in the emerging regions. If I could challenge you with, do you have a sense of what some of the key barriers are from all that we heard that really deserve focus when it comes to the core problem statement of increasing women-led SMEs? What is your sense of the most important ones?
Sure. And I'll tell you, I bring the perspective just from my personal life of having grown up in an SME business founded by my dad, but also having, come up the ladder in the corporate world, where I have to say I probably either experienced or directly observed the entire list of issues that Nicky went through. before I tell you what I think, answer your question directly, I'll also say this is a particularly critical issue to be talking about now, because there's already a lot of data out, in the world suggesting that women are leaving the workforce at a disproportionate level because of the very issues that Nicky has talked about with respect to childcare and the other pressures, the additional pressures that they're under in the household because of the impacts of the pandemic. So this is a critical issue to be addressing right now. So, I'm pretty practical. I'm from Brooklyn. And I think that the starting point is that leaders, particularly male leaders, have to really understand what does it mean to bring women to be inclusive of women-led SMEs. And so do you really understand what's going on in their lives that makes it harder for them to access, the things that male SME owners may just completely take for granted? So you're trying to address the needs of women who've been left out of the system, who find it very difficult to participate in the system. The tendency is to want to bring them into your system. And, my first observation is maybe the system itself needs to change. And how do you create a much more inclusive system versus saying, how do we get women to be part of this current system? And I think the starting point is to spend a few days in the lives of women, SME owners, and aspirants, shadow them, and really observe and listen to what they go through. So I think the starting problem is I'm not sure there's a complete understanding of how profound the problem is and how deeply embedded the biases are. I mean, all the businesses I've worked for, and I've worked for some great corporate brands. You mentioned Citi. I worked for American Express for many years. Have all made incredible efforts to try to be inclusive, right? And they all have, business and product offerings around SMEs, but it's the little behaviors on a daily basis that discourage women from wanting to participate or from feeling that they're not included or they just can't get there. So I think focusing on those, I think understanding how data is being used. There's a lot of talk now and hope that AI and machine learning and other technology tools can help create objectivity and help keep biases from being magnified. But if you don't start out, if the people leveraging that technology don't start out with a qualitative and deeply empathetic understanding of what the issues really are, it'll be really easy to misread the data and misapply it. So I'm not a big believer in the answers just spit out of a machine. I think it's people plus machine. And so it all goes back to having that understanding. I talk a lot in the Changemakers Playbook about the leadership requirements to innovate and about talent and how do you build an organization and culture. And I think any organization that is trying to help women SMEs should look around the table and make sure you have people who look like your customers in your organization, and make sure you're establishing an environment where all of those customer representatives really feel listened to, they feel valued, and that they are empowered to confront the behaviors that might be discouraging their or your customers' ability to participate in the system. So hopefully that begins to answer what's a very complex question.
Thanks for that, Amy. And I want to pick up on one point you made, and I even heard Bradley refer to the role of data. Data, the new oil, the currency that drives our future, has been lauded as the panacea for a lot of our issues, along, of course, with the increasing role of big tech. I know that, Inez, you have written about and studied this specific topic, and I was hoping you could start us off just examining what is you mean when you say the importance of collecting and utilizing gender disaggregated data, and the role that that could have to improve financial and digital inclusion. Can you share with all listening what you mean when you've written about this and how we all can be informed by this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we've basically figured out that getting the right gender disaggregated data is the key to convincing leaders of businesses that the women's market is something to go after and that that it's a massive business opportunity, right? So the data that we get from our members, and we have large commercial banks in our membership reporting data, shows that women have lower non-performing loans across all loan types. So this is banks all over the world reporting data. It also shows that for every dollar a woman saves in a bank, she's borrowing 33 cents, whereas for every 33 cents a man is saving, he's borrowing $1, right? So there's a mismatch. The data enables business leaders and ourselves to look at the business opportunity. And we recently did some research with fintechs because we believe that fintechs have the key to unlocking a lot of these, or solving for a lot of the barriers that women business owners face in terms of access. And we found that 80% of the fintechs actually did have data on the gender of their customers. However, most were not integrating that data into any decisions at any stage in their business life cycle. So the problem usually begins early on when they're developing their business case and they're pitching to investors. So they're looking at their total available market. They rarely actually look at that and disaggregate it by gender. And then this is coupled with a tendency to rely on certain assumptions about consumer behavior, such as men being early adopters of technology, and driven by a desire to grow their user base as quickly as possible and capture investor interest. And so then this leads to products and services that are designed with the archetypal male in mind and reflecting skews in the market research. And so our study found that just 11% of B2C fintechs surveyed use gender as a criteria to segment their market. And by the time that most fintechs reach maturity, they are well on their way to being caught up in this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of really just catering to the male market. So, but the fintechs that do have that data and do use it, so found 64% of the fintechs reported that female customers had similar or higher usage rates of their products as men. So this cast doubt on this myth that women, in fact, don't use technology at the same rates as men. Additionally, the majority of fintechs with the sex disaggregated data found similar or higher lifetime value from women customers and similar or lower customer acquisition costs. So that is why when you disaggregate the data, you can look at really the performance of women as a customer segment. And then we're looking at metrics like women being more loyal, having better repayment rates, referring more customers, getting those net promoter scores, all of those good things that we think then, of course, shine the light on this fantastic opportunity. So getting that data and unpicking it, and as the previous speaker said, it's really important to look at that data conscious of bias and trying to rectify that unconscious bias that you may have in looking at that data.
Well, that seems to make sense. Understand the power of the female segment and treat it deliberately. Let's try to make this real. I'm currently leading a large program, multi-country program of work with the Singapore government called Proxtera. And it's essentially trying to enhance trade between different SMEs in different countries. And we will use AI to improve how we connect buyers and sellers. How does a fintech, even one supported by the government, how do they put this into practice in terms of ensuring that we are not reinforcing any machine learning biases or data issues? Any recommendations for a fintech like the one that we are launching that we need to do better or to be more conscious of as we launch this?
Well, me or the other people?
Either Inez, Bradley, Amy, Nicky, whoever has a thought.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'll just make a quick point, and then I think it's really important to look at the underlying data to make sure that it isn't biased in itself, and then you have the and that does involve, as Amy was saying, a very deep analysis of understanding that data, understanding the context that data is constructed from, and then correcting for that bias, because once those algorithms start working, they will then reflect that bias, and then the person who's looking at the outputs of that AI will also have bias. So that's why you need diverse teams. And it's really important to unpack all of that bias within the data sets themselves. And in that way, we can course correct right from the beginning.
Can I just jump in with the question? Yeah, a question for Inez. It's a very fascinating topic for us. We're working closely with fintechs to try to make them sort of generally more impactful. All these issues around gender are hugely important. But so can you is it too early, or can you sort of weigh in and say, well, fintech is improving the situation with regard to women, or is it, further damaging, or what's your sense yet, or is it?
I think it's way too early to say. I mean, I think we have the example of the Apple card and the algorithm bias and so on. I think the data scientists are quite aware of the bias actually in large companies like MasterCard, and they're actively looking at bias within that. Not just about gender, by the way, it's race, ethnicity, social class, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's really early stage in terms of the fintechs actualizing and playing that out. So few fintechs are aware of the women's market to start with that they're not even looking at it.
So I think, like, superficially, the first thought most people have is, well, it increases access and ease and affordability for all, and so it's got to be good. But dig a little bit deeper, and then some of these biases that you cite come out. But be interesting to follow up after this separately on some of this work. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Winston, I'd like to go back to your question and build a little bit on the answer that we've given. That I do think it comes back to, you've got to have an employee team that reflects the diversity of the customers who you want to target. And then at a very basic level, I would advise any fintech trying to do this to, co-create the customer experience that you want to create with the women who you'd like to serve, and start to get into quick in-market experiences that allow you to collect data with your diverse team that has empathy for these customers. You can be analyzing and reading the data and challenging the things that seem to contradict what you learned in your early prototype development, and really start to dig. So it's a real iterative process of experimenting and learning and listening, but to constantly challenge what you're seeing and keep digging to get to the true story of the data.
I think I hear that we've confirmed the power of the data, but we need consciousness. And it goes back to your point and my concern: if we have female leaders and team members leaving the workforce, then it becomes harder to reflect your consumer base. So very, very interesting. And I'm going to push us towards some idea of solutioning. We've examined some of the barriers, and we have talked about what we need to be conscious of. I was looking not only for the strategic themes, but actual practical examples of what's working from the perspective of these four panelists, and how that might inform and inspire those who are listening to search for other solutions or even replicate. So Nicky, I'm going to start with you because I'm very aware of your New World, New Skills platform. And I was hoping that you could share briefly how you see technology and technology platforms enabling women's participation going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. You're right. I am very passionate about the future of work and the type of work or the skills and the capabilities required and the potential impact, positive impact on gender equality. I do see a real opportunity for greater female participation in the economy as a result of, digitization of work, technology enablement of work practices, and the changes in ways of working, and we've seen a lot of that both through technology, but also more recently through the pandemic. I think some of the major relevant changes are the hybrid working or remote working, which we've successfully tried through the pandemic, which creates opportunities for flexibility. I think the automation of work practices, which increases productivity, is significant. And, the examples can be many. Agricultural technologies used by women in farming, domestic technologies such as things for cooking or washing, all can be used in the home to increase productivity, or you then go into the office environment or factory environment where emerging technologies like RPA or AI can improve productivity. I think technology also. Sorry, I've just fallen off the. I think technology.
That's all right. We can still see you. Go ahead.
Good. Okay. I just clicked a funny button. I think it also enables much broader accessibility for women to be engaged and access, like we've been talking about, not only to access work, but to access finance and to access the broader economy. And there is a possibility that through the use of new and advanced digital platforms, women can be given opportunities to access different roles, Winston, which is what we were talking about with this skills expander platform. So the example that I'd like to talk about is Singapore government skills expander platform, which we at PwC are supporting MAS and IBF to build. And it's basically being made available to all financial institutions across the country. So this platform takes an individual's skills and capabilities. It takes their technical, their professional, and their soft or leadership skills and capabilities, and it matches these bundles of skills to the closest adjacent roles. So it's gender blind when it does that. Once the match is done, it then identifies gaps for training or education that are needed in order to be able to fulfill the new role. So the matching is done by algorithms. It's not done by humans, which gives a possibility for removing bias, but we've also talked about the potential bias that's built into algorithms as well. So, there's that risk there. But having said all of that, most of us are aware, and what we've been discussing is the starting point. So even though these technologies exist, the starting point is that less than 20% of the tech workforce worldwide are women, and that only 5% of those women hold leadership positions. So this imbalance can have an impact on how gender inequality and stereotypes are included in and even reinforced by these digital technologies or artificial intelligence or algorithms. I think this is sometimes, this is something we need to be acutely aware of. I think another really important factor is that according to very extensive research by UN Women, the reason that fewer women access technology is a direct result of their unfavorable conditions with respect to employment, education, and income. So again, it's these chronic societal stereotype barriers that are actually, even when these technologies are made available, that are stopping women from being able to access them.
Thank you for that. Inez, what's working? What do you put forth for our viewers as to effective solutions to address this exam question?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a strong correlation between the amount of gender diversity and inclusion inside a financial services provider and its performance in the women's market, right? So there's a correlation with this internal perspective and the external. For women as consumers of financial services, the number one issue is trust and establishing trust with her. A lot of women actually just don't trust financial services providers. There's 75% of women actually are dissatisfied with their banking services. So that's important. In terms of onboarding and so on, it's really a combination of technology and touch. We think about technology at the back end and people on the front end. And an excellent example is Time Bank in South Africa that just won our hackathon actually a couple of months ago. And they have kiosks set up in grocery stores with an ambassador beside that kiosk. An unbanked woman can go in and become banked in 3.5 minutes and get issued a debit card. And she's supported by, or he is supported by a Time ambassador who is 70% likely to be a female, who will help them through that process. That kind of technology and touch shouldn't be underestimated. It's a key element to getting more women into the system. I think it's important for everybody to understand that women are time poor. We've heard a lot about, the roles and responsibilities that women have in their lives. So it's not about selling products. It's about offering solutions to problems. And really the key to that then is to get that deep market insight. So echoing what was said earlier, really ethnographic, almost research techniques, following her around, observing what she does all day, I think is important. Solving for transaction costs as well, lowering those transaction costs, solving for pain points. Frankly, a lot of women, professional women, are too busy to look at how their pensions are being invested. So time is a big issue, and anything you can do to support her, enhance her financial security will be most welcome. And in terms of adding value, it's also really important to combine non-financial services with financial. And so what we're seeing actually, for instance, in the e-commerce space, is those platforms investing a lot in upskilling their users, both their sellers as well as their buyers. But the majority of people who are selling on those platforms are actually female. So you're seeing a kind of a big potential upskilling taking place because, of course, these platforms are reaching millions and millions of women. I would also say no pink marketing, make it a no pink marketing zone. Women find that, well, it depends, but in general, it doesn't feel real. It feels a little bit derogatory, perhaps sometimes even. So moving away from that to become more gender, we like to say gender intelligent, and really communicating about those products in a way that's careful not to alienate. So really gender neutral messaging can often, in fact, be skewed towards men. So you need to check for those unintended biases in the messaging. And finally, getting back to the first point about gender diverse teams, the incumbent financial sector is becoming more advanced when it comes. We still have not many female CEOs representing large financial services companies, but there's a lot of effort going on in the industry. In the fintech space, this is a very important area to take action on. It's getting more female into leadership.
Thank you, and noted on the pink. Bradley and Amy, I want to give you opportunity to give some final thoughts on solutions. Bradley, we've heard about tech platforms, we've heard about the importance of trust and time sensitivity. What other innovations would you put forth to our viewers? And I'm going to ask you for your best 1 or 2 minutes to make sure I have fair time for Amy.
Sure. Well, so we're focused on the developing world, and so a lot of the speakers highlighted the opportunity of this acceleration of digitalization in terms of, giving women more flexibility, giving women more time for, whether it's work or whether it's education. So these are important opportunities, but what we're concerned about and trying to solve for is that this acceleration of digitalization doesn't further create this digital divide, but especially a digital gender divide, and especially in the developing world. And so when we're bringing in or helping co-create solutions like with Mass and digital finance platforms, we're going to make sure we bake in from the very beginning this diversity and make it part of the core, right? So make sure women are involved building it, making sure that like centrally involved building it, but also looking at the very fundamentals, right, that are blocking access and like the digital literacy, like STEM. So it has to be really foundational and really a holistic approach. So no easy solutions, but just eyes wide open coming into it.
Thanks, Bradley. Amy?
Yeah, 2 points I want to make. One is one of my favorite female SME founders has launched a company called Positivity Tech, and they have developed what they're calling a bias index, which is an AI-based tool that can help businesses detect bias from reading employer customer narrative data. So I think it's a great application of advanced technology that hits right at the issues we've been talking about. It's really exciting. The other point I want to make when I think about founders and fintechs, that's a particular challenge, is, let's face it, most investors in fintechs who dominate the boards of the fintechs generally care primarily about a high valuation at exit. So my challenge to any CEO founder of a fintech is, how do you really embrace the role of not just CEO and founder and manager of your board, but chief culture officer, and connect the dots between the importance of the things that we're talking about and the objectives that your investors want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And given that the investor ecosystem is heavily dominated by men, and there's all kinds of issues in the investor world that we haven't really talked about today, I think that's a big practical challenge that any fintech leadership team should take on if they're serious about this whole opportunity.
I think that investment-focused discussion is our next panel, so look forward to reconvening. If I were to sum up and with a view of that challenge, if we had one piece of advice for a women-led SME business looking to differentiate in the current male-dominated industry, what advice would we give? Anyone?
Be resilient. I would say be resilient. Be resilient, find the right sponsors, get the right sponsorship and advice. I think they're probably the two things I'd say.
Yeah, I say similarly, have the courage of your convictions and surround yourself with great people. Don't compromise on talent.
Yeah, I would say network and find the right investors. Mm-hmm. They are out there. They're looking for you.
Yeah.
Bradley, the last word. I know you've been involved in launching an innovation fund recently. Last word?
Resilience is a great one. Resilience, resilience, resilience. Yes. 3 most important words.
Thank you all for sharing your time, thoughts, and experience on this important topic. It is important not for 50% of our globe, but 100% of our globe. So thank you for your time today. I think we're near the end, and I will just wrap up by saying that this topic has been put on the global stage of the FinTech Festival because the organizers believe it is one of the key topics that we must all be more conscious of, especially as we leave what has been a tremendous year that has stressed all of us, but also those who not only organize our lives, but run our businesses. To put those dual stress has been a tough one, especially in a COVID environment. So thank you all, and look forward to convening again. Bye for now.
Thanks, Winston. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Winston.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Winston, and panelists for that thoughtful discussion.